All right. I think we are. Oh no, except for I haven't got. I forgot one important part. There we go.
Hey,
Good morning, everyone. It's Marina Little from Little Works Indie Media, and this is Geek Speak with Greg. Greg, do you want to introduce yourself?
hi everyone. I'm Greg with Original 72 Creative, and we're a full service website graphic design and digital marketing firm in Vancouver.
And today we're going to discuss design for advertisements, which is one of the things that both Greg and I had a lot to talk about. A topic that we both are really interested in and work with. We work with designs for this in particular very often. And we've got somebody that's saying hello, but I can't see who it is. It's a Facebook user. So how do we, Greg? How do we figure out how to get the names of the Facebook users again? Do we remember?
Uh,
Do we know that?
Good question. No, I think we won't see them
Okay.
in the
All
cam,
right.
but
Well,
they'll show on the wherever they're watching from.
terrific. Well,
Yeah.
thanks so much for joining us. If you're there, and please pop any questions in the chat while we go, and we will happily answer them. So, Greg, where do we start when we think about designing for advertising?
Um,
Oh,
good
hey, Glenna.
question. I mean, there's lots of places to start. I mean, there's a lot about design and graphics, and things to consider. So,
Yeah,
I mean, right off the top, I think I want to mention that people really need to put more consideration into their graphics, just in general, because we
totally.
will go through a couple of things. But like, I see so many people posting things on Instagram or Facebook, thinking uh, they're going to get something out of it, but the graphics are just like, oh, I'll use this, and like it's an afterthought almost. Like I need something to show what I'm talking about. But there really needs to be a little bit more thought and care put into what it is you're trying to do, and that goes back to previous topics of really knowing what it is you're posting for, having that plan together, and the creating the graphics in certain ways just complements that knowledge that you have behind you and shows how much more professional and put together your advertisings will be. And I find a lot of people don't do that enough.
Yeah, so I'd like to make a distinction here because you use the word posting, and for me, there's a really big difference between posting and advertisement. So I'm thinking about like running Facebook ads in particular. A lot of these things, these tips that we're going to come up with today or present today, will go through posting too. And but one of the biggest problems that I have is that designers are not necessarily savvy on what happens on the Facebook platform, so they don't really understand how the platform affects their design. And so a business owner might say, hey, designer, I'm going to launch this product. I want to have all the information on here. We should probably have the pricing. We should have this, that, and the other thing. Or I have an event that I want to promote, and we want to put everything in that image because they're thinking print. They're thinking, generally thinking back to newspapers, or they're thinking posters, or designers will naturally go to those things when they think about advertising. And they often lay things out that's best for print and posters, and not because they have no experience working on the back end of actual ads. So Glenna's just put up, yeah. So Glenna says that like afterthoughts in headline writing, poor headlines, and no one's going to click. That's absolutely true. That's absolutely true. So we don't want this to be an afterthought. We don't want to like get all of our stuff ready. Like we don't want to put it up on the website, create the all the collateral on the website, and then say, okay, now we're going to push it out on our socials. So I need an image. So there are three things that we want to consider. One is imagery, like what you're choosing. The other one, and we're covering all of this, placement of the components, and then what the Facebook and Google platforms, what they do with the imagery based on the different outputs. So you can't have the same image for everything. You generally want to either choose the most optimal that will look okay across all things, or you want to create um, separate images for placements and organize that
Mm-hmm.
individually. So, Greg, one of the things that I do with my designers, and I'm going to just ask you the question, is like, what are your like? I know from my photographer days, not that I was a professional photographer, but I did go to school for it. Is that there are some placement considerations that you want to make in it when you're placing multiple components. So it might just be text on an image. It might include a couple of images with some text. But what do you recommend for the person that doesn't really know design very well? Where do you start?
Yeah, I mean, I see that all the time with customers who send me images and they're like, I want to use this in a graphic and I want to say this. And then I'm like, where am I going to put this on this graphic? Because there's like not really a good place.
Yeah.
So considerations for me are to make sure um, that the images that you choose, the item that you want to be most focal in the picture is not dead center.
Ah,
You
okay.
always want it to be off to one or the other side,
Hmm.
or in an upper or a lower section, so that so consider when you're looking at images where that text will be placed um, into a spot on the page.
Yeah. Yeah. So if you haven't heard of, you know, the golden rectangle or the golden means or
The
I like
golden
to call
ratio.
it, yeah, golden ratio. I like to call it the tic tac toe, tic tac toe board. Because if you think about it, if you can break your image up in two-thirds that way and two-thirds this way, like into thirds both ways, then
Mhm.
those lines are the important lines. So you want to sort of like make sure that you're not to the left or to the right, and then if you've got a person in there, you want to consider like where do you crop them, how do you move them, because there are a few basic points. So if you're going to crop top of the head a little bit, not too close because that makes people look weird, but a little bit off the hair is okay. And then you want to crop people sort of at their short sleeve line if you're going to crop them along the top. And then if you're going to crop a sort of a body, you want to crop sort of the top third of your thigh. And then if you're not going to, if you want to crop any lower than that, you don't crop at all, and you always include the shoes. You don't want to have people starting at the ankles, or the mid calf, which is actually it's quite common to see people do that when
Yeah,
they're doing their own
yeah.
stuff. And then the other thing that you want to do is when you're thinking about those sort of thirds, you want to crop people. You want to put their eyes on one of those lines, or you want to put their lips, their smile on one of those lines. Those are pretty good things to remember. And then the text, if you have text, if you have a block of text, it's the center of the text that you're matching up with one of those lines, not the top of the text or the bottom of the text, but the center. And that should generally keep you online. And the one thing that I love and that I always get my new social media people in who don't maybe have a background in visual any language or design or anything, I'll get them the book called Design for Non-Designers. And it just gives some really easy tips, and you can just thumb through and mark the spots for the different ways of, you know, thinking about, how squishy your text should be, how big it should be, and uh, should it be over to the left? Should it be over to the right? Like, if you have the person looking in this direction, where should the text go in relationship to that person looking in a direction? All of those kinds of things they're easy little tricks to pick up if you're aware that they actually exist. And this book is great. It's just a easy reference book. Um, and then you were bringing up focal information, Greg, and I'd love for you to chat a little bit more. How do you handle hierarchy of information? Because I think that's what it is. It's deciding the hierarchy on your information.
Yeah, the so essentially you want to have a good size heading, and the heading should be impactful and really capture what your advertising is supposed to be about. The second thing I typically see in that are wrong with some graphics is they have a nice large heading and oriented nicely on the image, and then there's a little bit more detail in a smaller font right underneath the heading. Sometimes it's small, sometimes it's a maybe a sentence or two, and then thirdly, there is like a call to action or button or something saying like sign up now or that kind of a thing to get people to act. And what I notice a lot is that the size of the secondary text underneath the heading is smaller than the call to action button or text, which if your eye is going straight from the caption heading to that, they're not seeing that secondary text, which should be more detail about what it is you're presenting them above
Yeah.
that caption. And a
Yeah.
lot of people will skip it, go to, and because the button might be bigger or the call to action is bigger, and they're skipping over that information, and you don't want that to happen because then they're not having enough information to interact and fulfill what you want this graphic to achieve for them, because they don't go back to that because they go to the heading, then they go to the next biggest thing, which might be the call to action, and they just skip over that
So,
other text. I see that a lot.
so what we're talking about here is the flow of your eye through the information. So what's the direction and the direction and the movement that your eye takes through an advertisement is pretty important. So just on that note, this is where I butt heads with designers because and business owners because I don't really want that secondary information on the image at all. And I sometimes don't even want that button on there or the call to action, depending on what it is. Because when I put those advertisements up on Facebook, the call to action is the heading, like a little heading on the bottom of the image. The button is separated outside, and then there's a nice little spot for all that text to go. And so I don't like it when we repeat what's in the image and what's in the text. And what's in the
Mhm.
text is super important. Like what gets put in the status is really important because electronic readers will read that. That's how Facebook organizes its search. If you're searching for events, for example, um, it'll show up from there. Details can bring your event up for certain search results. So we don't want to skip putting that stuff into the actual platform. So I don't really, and also then the other problem is that are people looking at this um, on a desktop or are they looking at it on an iPhone? So when you put the information on the images, that image goes shoo, and then all that little text goes shoo, and then all of a sudden no one can read it anyways. So that's why I like to have the secondary text in this status. Do you like my little sound effects? I mean, I
Yeah.
worked on those all night. I've been practicing those.
I mean, it
Um,
was the total shrinking sound, so it's perfect.
exactly, right? So I feel like we really need to know what the application is for these images when we're deciding what kind of information to put on the image, because I definitely think there are some key points that you could put to make things pop. Um, but the one thing that always gets me is that people put their event name on the image and then, it comes up in the Facebook event page and it comes up on the Eventbrite page. And so it's like just a duplication and it doesn't add anything and it doesn't help. Um, I don't think it really helps that much. I don't know. Maybe I don't know. Um,
Yeah, I was sort of coming at it, I guess, less of from the point of view of it being specifically for a Facebook ad,
yeah,
which is how you're coming across this, which, and I completely agree.
yeah,
Um, and just in general, you have to think about your graphic, what you're going to be using it for,
Yeah.
and only put on it what is really needed, because it's not like you want to clutter the entire graphic with all
Yeah.
kinds of text,
Yeah.
and like you absolutely don't want to do that. You want
Yeah.
to keep it minimal, but get a point across to
So
capture someone's imagination.
So sometimes instead of putting the event title on the image itself, what I like to do is one of those little red banners that go across the corner that says, only 10 tickets left or only 5 tickets left or whatever it is. That will help to move people to action because it's limited, right? So anything that creates that kind of like, ooh, I better get my ticket now before it sells out, rather than if you have just an event that's there that doesn't actually tell you how many tickets are left. People think that they have all the time in the world before the event time to purchase that ticket. So those kinds of things will move people to action. Um, I need to find my, where's my, I have to cough and I can't find my, where's the mute button?
So it's right next to your image on the eCam.
I don't see it. Oh God, no. Is that it? No, it must be on your next to your image, but not on mine. Okay, I'm gonna try and stifle it.
Just
Um,
cough.
okay, so the next thing that we want to talk about then is different placements. Can we talk about placements now?
Yeah, placements from the point of view of placing text within the image.
No, sort of. Sorry, placements in apps, like placements. So, for
Oh,
example, yeah,
where you're going to use the images.
where does it go
Yeah.
in Facebook itself? So here's the other thing is that most people don't know on the platform because they're just hitting boost on the front. They don't actually look at their image and organize their images well for placement. So what happens is you watch it on, you've made an image that's this shape for your Facebook desktop because that's what the that's usually what you get from a designer unless you ask for other things. You might get a square for social, but you'll either get a square or a rectangle, and then all of a sudden, you know, Facebook is trying to shove that thing onto stories, and it's cropping it in this direction. And so when you go into the ads manager, you do have the ability to crop your photos manually, which is very helpful because sometimes all
Mhm.
you need to do is move things over slightly and then you get most of the important bits in there, enough of the important bits in there to run the ad in that spot.
Mhm.
But sometimes you absolutely don't, and it looks terrible. So so it's really good to go and do your ads on Ads Manager instead of just hitting that boost post, and then you get the ability to also upload independent images for those particular placements. So you can ask your designer, if you give them the specs, you can ask them for a different aspect ratio. So aspect ratio is the ratio of the across to the down. Um, Most people don't know that. They ask for what size and they want like centimeters or they want, pixels, but it doesn't really work that way. Aspect ratios is easier to work with, and every platform has their aspect ratios organized online. You can just Google what you need for each of them. But generally, a square will be the best if you don't have the money for all of the iterations on Facebook. But if you can, it's nice to get a square plus the little mobile phone shape size, which is 16 by 9
Yeah,
aspect
I think
ratio.
the most important thing to think about really is whether or not you want to use these graphics in multiple locations, like on a like a full portrait mode on a mobile phone or desktop. And typically for desktop, for the easiest compatibility, like you said, Square would be your best option. But if at all possible, you want to create your graphics with the specific sizing of each of the
Yeah,
places that
I
you want
agree.
to use it for.
I
Yeah.
agree. That's
And
totally easy.
one of the good things about some of the graphics applications that are out these days. Like I know Canva for sure, and I use Figma, um,
Oh yeah.
XD. They all have pre-sizes
Yeah.
in the system. So if you know offhand where you're going to start to use these graphics, you can specifically pick those aspect ratios
Yeah.
in those applications to start creating your graphics. It
Yeah.
makes it really easy to just start with the
Yeah.
sizing that they
And
provide right there for each of those.
yeah, and pro tip, if you're doing one advertisement across a bunch of different places, start with the square, then you can edit that into the um, 16 by 9, which is the mobile phone version. And then you can also do a rectangle one for, let's say you're doing it a blog post also for it, or or a Mailchimp banner. You want a Mailchimp banner. You can go from a square to a rectangle easier. What's really hard is going from a rectangle, designing everything up all really pretty in there, and then trying to get it into a 16 by 9. That is like, trust me, don't start there. Start with your square, move to the phone, go back to the square, move to the rectangle. Um, and Canva should be able to organize that nice and nicely for you. It won't be exactly
Mhm.
the same. You'll have to put your components in different places, but it'll at least be a cohesive campaign. It'll look good across all places. Yay!
Yeah,
So somebody's
absolutely.
asking if they'd love to see some graphics examples. So okay, we'll try and post some. So if you're not watching this in the Facebook Cyberpunk Marketing Mixer group, that's where you want to come, because that's where we will post some examples of designs and where to put things and all that stuff. We'll see what we can come up with. Do you think we can do that, Greg? Sometime.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure I have some graphics that I've created that
Terrific.
I can share. Yeah.
Terrific. Okay, so what other aspects have we not hit on that's on our little notes?
A couple of things that we had considered talking about were colors,
Oh, yeah, of
um,
course.
and making sure your graphics basically stay on brand. Um, I was coming at this a little. Obviously, you're heavy on graphics for Facebook. I was sort of thinking of it more in general, just graphics in general, creating for any use, whether it be web or social or ads. But you want to make sure you keep on your brand colors. And one of the things that I was telling you about that I was confirmed with recently was specific colors for call to actions and things like that
Oh, yeah.
in graphics or just
Okay.
on a website in
Yeah.
general.
Yeah.
That like the color theory of using a blue or a red or a green button over another color to get more
Yeah.
clicks or more traction on an
Yeah.
ad is like completely unfounded. And
Yeah.
what you really need to focus on is keeping on brand colors for your business and having as much contrast as possible in anything that you really need people to notice or take action on. And the contrast really is what's going to make people see and make the graphics more usable.
Yeah. So I just want to expand a little bit about what you mean by brand colors, because I think that sometimes business owners get a little bit mixed up and a little bit rigid in what that means. And so,
Mhm.
brand colors um, is more than just what your logo colors are. So, what we don't really want to see is people designing entire websites and everything that they do in just the colors from their logo. What generally we do after we establish your logo colors is we create a palette, a branding palette um, of colors that complement your logo colors. So generally, they're going to be if they're done well, in my opinion. I like the ones that are sometimes they're analogous, which means similar color ways. I like the ones that are contrasty because that actually like not contrasty. Um, what's the word for the colors that are
Com-
across each
Complementary.
complementary, right? So if you
Yeah.
work with a complementary color palette as opposed to an analogous color palette, you will automatically build that contrast into your palette and into your brand, which makes it a lot easier when it comes to making decisions on what colors to use for your call to action buttons, for example. But what we noticed yesterday, which was super fun, because we went through a whole bunch of big uh, multinational e-commerce stores the other day to see, because it wasn't that long ago that marketers were telling you make those like call to actions in like bright red and get those people's attention. And it's like people are not dumb. If they want your thing, it's not going to be the color red that makes you buy. It's going to be actually the how it's going to affect your life and make your life better. That's what's going to make them want to buy, and then they will find that complimentary button. But what we noticed was that there is really a unified approach to e-commerce at the moment, especially in fashion, which is where we were really focusing yesterday or on Tuesday. And that is sort of like this really clean white space. And then that allows all of the product to pop because it's not in contrast to your brand colors throughout the whole site. And even a lot of the brands that we knew that they had colors, even they would put their logos up in the left corner, very quite nice and small, like how we like it. But they would put them up in the black tone rather than their actual full color. And then and then the other thing is the buy buttons were not super contrasty. They were usually black on the white background. So they were easy to pick out because against the color of the product and the white background, black is actually a really good choice. And it seemed to be the aesthetic that most of the fashion big brands were utilizing. And then here's the other thing that you can do when you think about your brand colors. You can also introduce every now and again a color that's not part of your brand, which is what um, was it the Bay that was doing it, or was it the Gap? I forgot. But one of them
Well,
had the
we looked at the bay and it had red and green,
yes,
but
that's the one.
both
But they were
both
roll.
red and green are part of like they have that multicolor
That's
yellow,
right.
red,
That's
green,
true. But
black.
that green wasn't that green a little bit different than their brand green though. Like I thought it was more
I
of a
didn't look
Christmas
at it
green.
close enough, but
Okay.
yeah.
But they cleverly and beautifully integrated the green and red, which you're right is part of their brand. But I think that green was different. It was more of a tealy green rather than a greeny green. But anyways,
Mhm.
um, they did it in this really subtle way where when you rolled over the buttons, the Christmas colors came up, which I thought was really good. It's almost like a little bit subliminal, but not, and it's nicely Christmas and festive, but not in your face. So I really enjoyed that little introduction of color in that weirdo little spot. Um, and and so yeah, it's super important to have contrasty things so that things pop and don't sort of. Oh, I had a client yesterday, and their website. We're just going to do a refresh for them, and their last website was all done in their brand colors and their logo colors. No other palette except for like I think three colors. And it looks. She was complaining that she felt her site looked washed out, and that's why it looks washed out
Mhm.
because you're using and it's not washed out like it is a really they're all three of them are beautiful colors, but it just has the washed out effect because it's not contrasting. There's nothing contrasting with it. So it plays color plays a super important part because it affects your psychological response, how you respond to it.
I know we're creeping up
Oh,
on a
can I
minute
just
left here, and there was
sorry,
one
one last
last
thing.
thing, or
Do you have one last thing
yeah,
too? Do we have time for one last
I,
thing?
maybe.
Maybe it's the same
We'll
last
go with
thing.
mine first quickly.
Okay.
Yeah, it was about spacing as well as alignment. It was spacing and how content on your graphics line up, and the spacing meaning how far apart things are
Oh,
from one
yes.
another so
Yes.
that it creates a little bit of like that negative space within, and so items on your graphics aren't competing with each other are really important in the overall aesthetic of what your graphics end up being.
Yeah, and especially I see people go a little bit in the wrong direction with this spacing. When I think about it, like padding around the elements. So if you've got a box of text, it doesn't go right down to the corner of the image that you're using. There's a little bit of a space.
Mhm.
Your logo is not smushed up down at the bottom there. It's got a little bit of space, and you should have a branding document that actually dictates how much space that actually is. But if you don't
Yeah, how
have one,
close something can come to your logo,
yeah,
kind of a thing.
exactly, because you don't want things butt up. It makes people anxious when you've got things really touching and stuff like that. It actually has this effect. And then the last thing that I wanted to bring up was the types of images. So I always explain when I'm choosing images, I don't choose images that are descriptive. So, unless you're selling a product, if you're selling a product, you're going to use the product. But if you're selling a service, you don't really need to be descriptive. So, for example, if I'm selling social media training, I don't want to be putting up Facebook and Twitter logos and stuff like that. I work on the idea that you want to create an image where your client is going to be able to imagine themselves in that space. So I think of lifestyle. I look at happy, not stressed out, entrepreneur type looking people that where the training has actually impacted their life, that they feel really great about things. So you want to kind of do that sort of thing, and people do convert better um, than other kinds of stock images, and non-stock images convert better than stock images. But if you only have stock, pick something that doesn't look so stock-ish. You know what that looks like. And animals convert really well too. So, and anything that's arresting, you want your advertisement to come out of the page when people are scrolling through. So sometimes you use, like I've seen some brands use images that have absolutely nothing to do with what it is that they're selling, but it goes really well because their brand is edgy. So the photos are edgy, and
Hmm.
they don't address any of the things that are being sold in terms of services or products. So yeah, that's how I wanted to end off, and now we're well over. Thanks for sticking with us. Um,
No problem, but they were all good points. So
Thanks. All right, so that's all we've got for you this week. And next week, you can join us again here, again in the Cyberpunk Marketing Mixer Facebook group. If you're not watching us there already, and I'm just trying to find. I have it up. Where is it? It's just everything's a
it's
little
gonna
slow.
be it's
What's
gonna
next?
be our monthly marketing roundup
All right, next week
topic.
is the monthly marketing roundup. So join uh, Greg and I, along with Pip and Phelan, and we'll see you next week. Have a great week.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.